Our story begins with a young man who, after graduating, took out a loan to build the village's only pumping station. For 8 years, he only charged the basic electricity rate so the neighbors' orchards wouldn't wither away during the dry season. But his greedy uncle and a local agricultural firm decided to report him. They falsely accused him of stealing electricity and wasting water, eventually forcing him to hand over the management. In the year 2000, he signed a liability waiver, removed his own central motor, and set off to see a friend about building a fully automated organic farm right in the middle of a drought. When the villagers saw the astronomical bills and their fruit trees dying on the mountainside, they grabbed his uncle and shoved our protagonist down into the mud. Just moments before that chaos, he had been busy cleaning the water pump's filter. His uncle, Ian, walked into the pump room accompanied by a stranger carrying official documents and a piece of candy. As soon as he stepped inside, Ian's face twisted into a deep, disapproving frown. He complained about the noise and asked Ethan just how old this ancient pump was supposed to be. To Ian, it seemed incredibly inefficient, with water trickling out as weak as a child's stream. He even accused Ethan of restricting the water on purpose. Aunt Wendy had just arrived with her empty bucket, and upon hearing this, she dropped her carrying pole to the ground in frustration. We have to remember the village is on high ground. The fact that this pump works at all is a miracle. For 8 long years, Ethan had only ever charged them for the basic electricity costs. He asked for patience as he opened the gate, but his uncle told him to save the fairy tales. Ian scoffed at the idea of a basic fee, claiming he had paid $60 just the previous month. He went as far as to accuse Ethan of tampering with the system or stealing water to sell to the next town. Ethan explained that since their orchard was on the highest peak, pumping water up there required a massive amount of electricity. The account books were right there, posted on the wall for everyone to see. He told them to look for themselves, as he couldn't make sense of their false accusations. Ian simply ignored him, insisting that Ethan had been swindling the villagers out of their hard-earned money. He then called for everyone's attention, introducing a man named Mr. Miller from the Green Garden Agricultural Company. Ian claimed that if they handed over this old pump to Mr. Miller's company for management, they would immediately receive a free upgrade to a modern irrigation system. The representative, Mr. Miller, stepped forward to address the crowd. He cleared his throat and explained that modern agriculture was all about precision drip irrigation. In his view, this antiquated equipment should have been replaced a long time ago. He promised that if they handed it over, the company would replace everything for free. They would even be able to pay for their water right from their mobile phones at home. Aunt Wendy, who used to smile at Ethan, blinked in surprise the moment she heard the word free. The other villagers began to murmur among themselves, thinking a free upgrade sounded like a wonderful idea. They complained that Ethan's pump was far too old and occasionally caused power outages in the area. They figured Ian had seen the world and surely wanted the best for the village. He wouldn't deceive them. Ethan looked at those familiar faces, the same neighbors he had helped by repairing power lines in the pouring rain. At midnight, just to save their fruit trees, he watched as their expressions shifted from doubt to eager expectation, noticing that even their glances toward him now held a hint of suspicion and disdain. The hand holding the key slowly grew cold as he realized where things were heading. The next day, before the sun had even risen, the village loudspeaker began to blare. His uncle, Mr. Kong, spoke with a heavy seriousness, calling every villager to an emergency assembly. The agenda was simple: remove Ethan from his position and welcome the era of modernization. By the time he arrived at the meeting grounds, we see the courtyard was already packed with people. Standing on the steps with a stack of printed documents, his uncle addressed the crowd. He claimed water was the village's lifeblood, and they couldn't let Ethan keep control of it. The village chief approached with his hands behind his back, telling Ethan to look around. He told him this was the will of the people, and that the time for modernization had finally come. It was about agricultural progress, he insisted, and Ethan needed to think of the greater good. Furthermore, his uncle warned that the Green Garden Company wouldn't start work unless Ethan surrendered the key. They apparently feared he might sabotage them, which, to be honest, was a bit of a stretch. Ethan reminded the chief that for 8 years, he had paid for every replacement part out of his own pocket. Whenever the pipes leaked in the dead of winter, he was the one diving into the freezing water to fix them. He hadn't received a single cent in subsidies from the village for all that backbreaking work, and now they wanted to throw him out? The chief simply replied that times change. He argued that a large corporation had technology that Ethan simply couldn't compete with. Why keep killing himself with all that manual labor? He told Ethan not to worry about it. He urged him not to be stubborn, while Ethan looked out at the hundreds of people in the courtyard. Not a single person stepped forward to say a word in his defense. Not even Aunt Mary, who had just been praising him yesterday for repairing the pump, would meet his gaze. In that moment, any remaining loyalty he felt for this place completely vanished. He pulled a document from his pocket that he had drafted the night before, a formal resignation and division of assets. Without a word, he placed it firmly on the village chief's table for everyone to see. If they wanted him to hand over control so badly, he decided he would give them exactly what they asked for. Since they all chose to believe he was corrupt and that the corporation was their savior, he would step aside. He told them to sign and leave their thumbprints, declaring that from this day on, the water supply was no longer his concern. Ethan made it clear, from this point forward, whether they faced drought or flood, life or death, he was out. He told them they would each have to face their own destiny. The villagers looked at the paper, momentarily stunned. His uncle was the first to snap, claiming the village wouldn't fall apart just because Ethan was gone. He didn't hesitate to be the first one to press his thumb into the red ink and sign the paper. Then came his second cousin, then Aunt Mary. The entire village began to line up one by one. They were all terrified that a simple delay might cost them their precious free high-tech upgrade. They signed with an almost frantic enthusiasm, and as Ethan watched the pages fill with red marks, the heavy weight he had been carrying in his heart for years suddenly shattered, replaced by a sense of total relief. He tucked the signed agreement away, turned his back on the crowd, and walked toward the pump house. His uncle and a group of villagers followed close behind him, watching him as if he were a common thief. He unlocked the door, grabbed a heavy wrench, and headed straight for the back of the machinery room. Under the stunned gaze of the crowd, he began to dismantle the high-pressure pulse generator. It was the single most critical component of the old pump, and it belonged entirely to him. There was a specific motor that still had the power to pump water all the way up to the back mountain. It was his own private property, purchased at a steep price through some well-placed contacts. The villagers, however, had always dismissed it as nothing more than a piece of junk. His second cousin, seeing him approach it, let out an alarmed shout for everyone to watch out. He claimed Ethan was going to sabotage the system and yelled for the others to stop him. He warned them not to let Ethan take what he called the collective property of the village. And so, several villagers rushed forward to block the door, convinced they were protecting their own. Ethan simply smiled sarcastically and pulled the original bill of sale for the motor from his backpack. He held it up alongside the liability waiver they had all just finished signing. He told them to open their eyes and look closely at the proof of who actually owned the machine. The receipt clearly showed he had paid 80,000 credits of his own money for it. The agreement also explicitly stated that he was entitled to take all of his personal belongings with him. He pointed out that he hadn't touched a single screw of the pump room or the pipes they wanted so badly. A heavy silence fell over the room as his uncle's face turned a sickly shade of pale. Looking at the black ink on the official document, the old man found he couldn't utter a single word. By the time Ethan finished dismantling the grease-covered motor from its base, he was drenched in sweat. While the machine looked battered and peeling on the outside, those who truly understand machinery knew better. It was a high-power industrial motor built with first-generation pure copper coils, a rare find indeed. To get water from the ravine to the highest orchard in the village, he had worked tirelessly. He had spent weeks scouring used equipment markets across 3 different cities to find this exact piece. He had spent exactly 80,000 credits to bring it here and keep it running over the last 8 years. No matter how unstable the voltage became or how long it had to pump water, this old motor had never once failed him. However, weighing over 400 pounds, he couldn't lift it alone and had to slide it across wooden planks toward the truck bed. The rough hemp rope sliced into his palms, and the stinging sweat began to blur his vision. Instinctively, he looked toward the gate, and there, in the empty lot by the entrance, we see dozens of villagers from his own town gathered together. There was Aunt Jane, Uncle Bill, and all those familiar faces he had once helped so willingly, often spending his own midnight hours repairing their irrigation pipes for free. They all stood in the shade of the old locust tree, yet not a single person stepped forward to help, nor did they offer even a polite word of farewell. Instead, they covered their noses as if they feared the smell of grease on his body might stain them. Their eyes filled with a mixture of undisguised contempt and suspicion. At that moment, his cousin Isaac raised his phone and began filming him without stopping. Isaac mocked him, telling Ethan to be careful not to throw out his back with that piece of junk. He shouted for everyone to look at the man who used to be the village's so-called water king. He claimed Ethan had deceived them for 8 years with nothing but a scrap industrial motor. He complained that everything reeked of used oil and questioned if the water from such a machine could ever be good for their orchards. He even blamed the poor fruit sales of recent years on this very pump. He insisted the root of all their problems was right here, and the crowd began to agree with him. He claimed the water was surely full of heavy metals and that it was high time for a change. Even the noise of that old machine bothered him, apparently keeping him from his afternoon naps. He told Ethan to take it away quickly, as just looking at it was a nuisance. Then, Uncle Ian appeared, standing with his hands tucked behind his back. Like a general who had just won a great battle, he stepped out from the crowd. He had even put on brand new clothes today specifically for the occasion. His pockets were bulging, and one could just make out the outlines of several cigarette packs. This was his reward, a bribe from the massive Lu Yuan Agricultural Corporation. They had just handed it over as payment for his recent promotional efforts. He told Isaac to stop filming, acting as if he were the voice of reason. He sighed, telling Ethan to just leave quickly and be done with it. He claimed he wasn't criticizing, but that Ethan was simply too stubborn to move with the times. The Lu Yuan company was bringing in high-tech, intelligent equipment from the city tomorrow, featuring pumps made entirely of high-grade stainless steel. It supposedly came with deep, multi-layer filtration systems. The new water would not only be cleaner than anything that old machine could produce, but because they were a large corporation, the water rates would be cut in half. It would be even cheaper than Ethan's supposed cost price. He then turned to the neighbors. He promised that from now on, the village water would meet the same standards as bottled water in the city. No one would ever have to come out at midnight again just to watch over a switch. Ian explains that everything is controlled with a single click on a mobile phone for automatic irrigation. What do we call this? He asks. This is what we call smart, internet-based agriculture. We see the villagers listening intently, convinced their town is about to strike it rich. They grin from ear to ear, already imagining their autumn orchards heavy with fruit. To them, those fruits look like solid gold. An impatient young man even spits near Ethan's truck, telling him to hurry up and leave so he doesn't block the corporation's construction vehicles. Ethan simply wipes the rust from his hands, looking at these people who think they're so clever. Deep down, his heart has turned completely cold toward them. He reminds them that